if I were a person drafting policies in government, what could I possibly do and what could I possibly say that would allow young mothers to go ahead and run after their ambitions, to also tell them that, hey, you can also be a mother, it's not mutually exclusive.
I'm sure most people don't want to raise like a generation of iPad kids.
In her maiden speech in Parliament, PAP MP Cassandra Lee said,
"This is perhaps the best time in Singapore to start and raise a family because the government is listening, learning and determined to act."
Singapore faced a record low total fertility rate of 0.97 in 2023, and in 2024 it remained unchanged. This is fueled by rising cost of living, today's global and political climate, even stress. So it begs the question, is this really the best time to start a family in Singapore? Welcome to Friendly Fire, where youth come together to debate stuff in real life. Today with me, I have Soham and Nasha, who will give their thoughts on whether it really is the best time to start a family in Singapore.
Hi, my name is Soham. I'm 24 this year, and maybe not just super soon yet.
Hi, my name is Nasha. I'm 22 this year. I've considered it, but I do think there are a lot of considerations that come to mind when I consider how the timeline looks like in starting a family. So I guess we'll see after this debate.
To decide whether you argue for or against the statement that this is really the best time to start a family in Singapore, you guys will play scissors, paper, stone. Winner will choose their stance. Okay, ready? Come together. Scissors, paper, stone. He won.
Choose.
So what stance would you like?
Ooh, let's play the hard way. I'll say against.
Again, so
Yes.
that it is not
the best time right now.
Okay, so you will argue that this is the best time.
Yep.
So, like in every debate, you gotta bring your proof, you gotta bring your receipts to back up your own arguments. So you guys will have 1 hour to research as much as possible to get enough information to back up your own opinions.
Okay.
You will use either parliamentary replies, parliamentary questions, government policies or politician speeches, and use that to back up your own opinions because we want to hear from you guys as well. Okay?
Yeah.
So you ready?
Yes.
Okay, you got 1 hour. Your time starts now. Go.
I did have my doubts at the beginning when I was asked to argue for the fact that it is a good time to start a family in Singapore. But I think after having seen the policies and the possible angles in which I can argue about for this proposition, I'm actually quite confident. So we'll see.
I mean, after the 1 hour research, I think I've solidified my position a little bit more, but we'll see how the debate itself actually goes. I'm a bit nervous.
So you will each have 1 minute for your opening statement. I'll just give you a little signal when it's like almost time's up, and against will go first. After that, we'll have 6 minutes of rebuttals, and then we'll have a closing statement, which is also 1 minute each.
Some of the biggest concerns that we have these days with families and in general is cost of living, is work-life balance, is your personal and mental well-being, and all of these have great impacts not just on your own personal health, but it can have a huge impact on your ability to raise a family, to start a family, to raise kids. And so until I think these concerns are alleviated, it's never really going to be a best time to start a family.
As Soham quite well summed up, we often hear people say that this is the worst time to start a family in Singapore. And honestly, as he will argue, there is some truth to this statement. But a bulk of this sentiment doesn't come from facts. It comes from fear. It comes from the national habit of often looking at the darker side of things rather than seeing what we actually have in front of us. Rising costs, long hours and uncertainty, as Soham had raised, we often focus on these things and see stormy clouds instead of the sky in front of us. But here's the truth. On both a global, regional and local scale, while it may not be the best time to start a family in Singapore, it is certainly not the worst. And I will highlight 3 reasons why.
Now you guys will have 6 minutes for rebuttals. Who would like to go first?
I'd like to hear your 3 points, honestly. Mine's not that organized.
Alright, sure. Looking at the evidence before us, families today receive an unprecedented, multi-layered financial support from the government. Second, while controversial, I know, we arguably have more work-life balance and protection for working parents than we do, and than our parents and grandparents had back in former generations. Third, we have an incredibly strong infrastructure that offers safety and stability for raising a child in Singapore. Going to my first argument, we have the most materially supported generation of parents that Singapore has ever had. According to the Ministry of Social and Family Development, in 2025, they had a family trend report. And in this report, it states that full-day infant care prices nearly tripled and childcare places nearly doubled over the last decade. And despite this expansion, fees fell and then continued to stabilize. Median infant care dropped from 1,275 in 2020 to about 1,235 in 2023. And this continued to remain stable in 2024.
I mean, cost of like childcare wise, I think it goes beyond just, childcare institutions and institutional support in terms of, grants, funding, subsidies. Our parents and grandparents had less institutional support. But I think the biggest difference between then and now is that there was a lot more societal support in terms of raising a family in the past. You had fewer, working elderly, you had fewer senior citizens in general, you had a larger working age population. And so there was less burden of care placed on the working adults to take care of both children and the elderly. You often had, grandparents helping to take care of the kids, while there was less sort of financial pressure on these working adults as well. The duties could be split between the parents and grandparents. But now, with the aging population, more elderly citizens in Singapore, there's a greater burden of care placed on the working adults, and it's a shrinking working adult population. The financial stress now goes both ways, up and down the generational tree. And just beyond childcare, your personal kind of cost of living concerns are also quite high. But when I was interning, I stayed at Yio Chu Kang, I was traveling to Tuas every day, taking public transport. My monthly cost, without any concession adds up to, $96. And even with concession pass is $126 per month, so, no point buying that either. So you're spending almost $100, maybe over $100 per month just traveling.
I think we have this misconception that each child in Singapore costs about $1 million, and I hear that very often. But I think the largest recurring cost when it comes to children in Singapore, a large part of it comes from education. And as a society, we've put so much focus on education, how we can further support our children to extracurricular classes, and it is a big bulk of how much we spend. And whilst I take into account your arguments on transport and groceries and all that things, the focus here is, can we raise a family right now? And the core of that family is, how much do we want to put into raising our children? And so this brings me back to my point on childcare. A lot of middle-income families spend quite amount of money on putting their child through childcare. This is about 6% of their income. And while I understand this is a significant percentage, it is still, as I mentioned, a very big structural improvement from past years, in which middle-income families had spent close to 8% on childcare alone. So whilst this means that the largest recurring cost of childcare it is actually at its most affordable point in a decade, and I think this is really thanks to deliberate state intervention. And whilst perhaps there can be more consideration for external factors that do play a part in deterring Singaporeans from raising a family, I do think at its core there has been sufficient state intervention that tackles these issues as well.
I mean, credit where credit is due. Just this year, we saw the change in, paternity leave, where it was increased to mandatory 4 weeks, and an additional 10 weeks of shared parental leave as well. Which, on paper, it does give a lot of incentive for people to, be more involved in raising their own family. Most people agree that, both parents should take equal share in raising the child. What we see in practice is that it isn't happening. We still see an unequal burden of care placed on the mother in raising the kid. Even when, back in 2019, when, there was only 2 weeks of mandatory leave, only slightly more than half of fathers took the full extent of the 2 weeks off to be there in the early childhood period. So beyond just, financial and sort of time-based concerns to this, there's also a level of societal pressure. What we see is that a lot of young people these days aren't willing to make that sacrifice early on, or at least at this early stages of their career. I
think to go back to the core of this question, and that is whether is it a good time to start a family in Singapore? In last year's National Day rally, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong had announced a myriad of additional measures that allowed eligible working parents in Singapore to get more paternal leave. The new shared parent leave allows a total of up to 30 weeks, that's about 7.5 months of family care leave. And again, a drastic improvement from the current scheme, in which, as you mentioned, working mothers can only share up to 4 weeks of leave with their husbands. And now there is some sort of, mindset development that we see from our people, and it's reflected in the government, that we understand that fathers now have to play a part in raising a child. It is, and while it may be a societal expectation that is imposed on mothers to play the primary role in caretaking, we can see that our government is starting to realize that this may no longer be the case. And it's really depicted and illustrated to the amount of policies that have been rolled out to ensure that fathers have that opportunity and have that space to even take leave. So I think that's something that should be taken into account. Another argument I'd like to bring up in relation to workplace policies is that it's become a more mainstream idea for companies to be more flexible in work arrangements. The MSF's Family Trend Report states that among employees aged 25 to 64 who required flexible workplace arrangements, 87% had access to that arrangement that they required, and this is up from 84.1% in 2022.
That is a fair point, but what about childcare leave? Because I'm not sure, I remember reading somewhere that it's like maybe 6 days of childcare leave. Do you think that's enough? Is that a good enough incentive? Because if you think about it, you only have 6 days of childcare leave. You have maybe 1 or 2 children. If they end up falling sick, then is that enough? Or should we be advocating for more?
You don't see a lot of support for parents to be able to be there for their kids later on, past the age of 6, past the age of 12. In a way, I suppose the flexi work arrangements are something that are meant to kind of address that in a way with the guidelines. We saw a lot of mothers usually, take more flexible work arrangements in the long term. They saw, consequences in their, long-term career plans and promotions in the long term. And so maybe, we still need, stronger kind of protections for parents in the later stage of childcare, beyond just, the first few months. Beyond just the first, stages of infancy. I'm sure most people don't want to raise like a generation of iPad kids.
Do you guys think that perhaps what needs more than just government policies is a shift in society's mindset towards family, towards how kids are being raised, maybe even just because a lot of grievances could possibly come from the fact that, oh, my kid has to do well in school, so we need to give them tuition, enrichment classes, we got to set them up for life.
I think this brings me to a conversation I had with my mom. I asked her, Mom, why were you such a tiger mom growing up? And she asked me, you think you won't be, meh? And I think that sums it up so well, in that while we now as people who don't have children say that we don't want our children to follow the same route that we took, which means going crazy for primary school, crazy for secondary school, crazier for JC or poly, and then the craziest in uni, will we not implement the same rules on our children? So I think it's not about changing the cultural mindset towards our country's children being so fixated on academics. I do think it's just a shift in priority. What has to change is recognizing that we are raising little people who should be given emotional support, should be given the time to explore their own ambitions, and perhaps we can find some kind of balance where we have really academically strong children that are also so multifaceted and have their own interests and excel at multi things that they'd like to do.
Until we see a shift in sentiment towards that, it'll be harder to really get that proper balance in terms of that. So yeah, the change has to start with someone, be it our generation, be it our parents or the ones that come after us. But it'll be a slow change. And can there be things that are done to support that, to accelerate that change from a policy perspective? Maybe, sure. But culture doesn't change that quickly. It needs time. It needs to be slowly molded into what you need it to be.
Now you guys have 1 minute each to give your closing statement, really sell the point. You will go first this time.
It is quite tough to play devil's advocate and to raise arguments in support of something that most people would disagree with. And so I'd like to bring us back to where we begin. The familiar line that we hear too often is, this is the worst time to start a family in Singapore. Rising costs, not flexible working arrangements, the misconception that we need about $1 million to have a child. I think it's time that we took a step back and look at what we have in front of us, and that is infrastructure, the lived experience and the policies that government has put into place. And like Soham said, we have to give credit where it's due. We are, as I mentioned, one of the most materially supported generations of parents in this country. We have more workplace support thanks to COVID than any other generation before us. And when policies are announced, they happen. And not a lot of countries in this world can argue that they have a solid mix of safety, transparency in government, and accountability. And this is one of the countries in the world where I know no matter how hard I have to spend on my child, and no matter how much that budget is, I know that if my child leaves home at 6 p.m., he or she will come home safely. The government will make sure that the education rolled out is good and of quality. And ultimately, I think we turned out just fine. So I think our children will turn out fairly good as well.
I don't know whether my parents will agree I turned out fine, but all right, your 1 minute, let's go.
I agree it's not the worst time to start a family in Singapore right now, but I can confidently say it is not the best time either. While we see a lot of institutional support from the government from a policy perspective in terms of childcare, baby bonuses, parental leave, there's still a lot of hesitancy from the people to really make full use of that. We see, fathers not making full use of paternal leave. We see, sort of pushback from employers or middle managers when it comes to flexible work arrangements, whether it's, in the long term with career impacts, or in the short term, trying to subtly encourage people not to go for it. We see shifting priorities in our generation where people don't want to start having kids so soon, They've just finished uni, they've just graduated, just gotten married, but they still want to focus on their careers, they still want to spend more time as a couple. And they're just not ready to commit to a full family just yet. To add on to that, concerns about cost of living are never going to go away, especially as, nation inflation costs are going to keep going up. Studies have shown that, with sort of pay packages, baby bonuses, only really incentivize people who are planning to have kids anyway. And so the real change that we need to see now is whether future policies and, the slow change in societal sort of priorities will affect the opinions of people who are less sure about having kids right now.
Thank you guys for joining us today. I hope this gives you a little bit of something to think about when you go home, talk to your friends and all that. But what do you viewers think? Vote for the argument you agree with more in our caption below and let us know why. Tune in next time for more friendly fire debates.